ass! This guy's trying to cash a fake check! Got aggressive the second I questioned him!
Aggressive? I just asked to speak to the manager. My wife is dying, damn it!
ID, slowly! Keep your hands where I can see them!
Everything's real!
Back off!
The grainy footage from the bank's security camera flickered to life, capturing a moment that would haunt St. Louis for years. It was a crisp autumn morning in 2018, and inside the bustling branch of First National Bank on Grand Boulevard, a tall, broad-shouldered black man in his mid-60s shuffled toward the teller window. His name was Eddie Randolph, a veteran whose weathered face bore the scars of battles long forgotten by most. He clutched a worn check in his trembling hands, his eyes sunken with worry. The camera caught the teller's polite smile turning into a frown as she examined the document. "Sir, this looks a bit off," she said, her voice barely audible over the hum of the lobby. Eddie's response was calm at first. "Mayam, it's legitimate. I need this for my wife's surgery." But the security guard, a burly white man named Harlan Briggs, overheard and stepped in, his hand instinctively reaching for his radio. What happened next unfolded in seconds, but felt like an eternity on that tape. The guard's suspicion ignited like a spark in dry tinder. "You sure about that check, buddy?" Harlan barked, his tone laced with doubt that cut deeper than words. Eddie, standing at 6'2", with a frame still hinting at the strength of his younger days, straightened his back. He was no stranger to being questioned. Decades of life as a black man in America had taught him that. But this day, desperation fueled his plea. "I've banked here for 30 years. Call my account manager if you have to." The camera panned slightly, showing the lobby filling with uneasy glances from other customers. Harlan wasn't buying it. He radioed for police backup, citing a possible forgery. Minutes ticked by like hours, the tension building as Eddie paced, his heart pounding, not just from anxiety, but from the literal ache in his chest that his doctor had warned him about. Then the officers arrived. 2 patrolmen from the C-Sting, Lewis Metropolitan Police Department, burst through the door. Officer Derek Malone, a young white cop in his late 20s with a buzz cut and a stern jaw, leading the way, and his partner, Officer Lena Vasquez, a Latina woman in her 30s, trailing behind with her hand on her holster. The body cam on Malone's chest activated automatically, syncing with the bank's surveillance to provide a dual view that would later be dissected in court. "What's the situation?" Malone demanded, his eyes locking onto Eddie like a target. Harlan pointed accusingly. "This guy's trying to cash a fake check. Acting real shifty." Eddie's voice rose in frustration. "It's not fake! My wife's dying, man. I need this money now." The camera captured the raw fear in his eyes, the sweat beading on his dark skin under the fluorescent lights. Malone didn't hesitate. "Hands where I can see them," he ordered, advancing with purpose. Eddie complied slowly, but in the heat of the moment, Malone perceived a threat, or so he claimed later. Without warning, he drew his taser and fired. The prongs embedded into Eddie's chest, sending jolts of electricity coursing through his body. Eddie convulsed, his massive frame crumpling to the floor with a thud that echoed through the bank. Gasps filled the air as customers scattered. Vasquez shouted, "Derek, what the hell?" But it was too late. Eddie's heart, weakened by years of stress and untreated conditions from his veteran days, faltered under the shock. The footage showed the chaos erupting tellers ducking behind counters, Harlan frozen in shock, and Vasquez rushing to Eddie's side, checking for a pulse. "He's not breathing," she yelled into her radio, calling for paramedics. Malone stood there, taser still in hand, his face paling as realization dawned. But as the screen froze on Eddie's lifeless form, one question lingered in the air like smoke from a gun's: why did a simple bank visit turn deadly? And what hidden pains had driven Eddie to that desperate moment? The truth, buried in his past, was about to unravel in ways no one expected. But just as the paramedics arrived on scene, a shocking discovery in Eddie's wallet would change everything. The bank lobby still smelled faintly of burnt ozone and fear when the paramedics finally wheeled Eddie Randolph out on the stretcher. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry hornets. Officer Malone stood frozen near the teller counter, taser dangling from his right hand, the spent cartridge still hanging by its wires like a broken promise. His partner, Lena Vasquez, had already started chest compressions on the cold marble floor before the medics took over. She kept muttering under her breath, "Come on, old man, fight." But Eddie's eyes remained open, glassy, staring up at nothing. The security guard Harlan Briggs kept repeating the same sentence to anyone who would listen. I just did my job. I just did my job. His voice cracked on the third repeat. Customers who had ducked behind chairs and pillars slowly emerged, phones still recording, some crying quietly, others cursing under their breath. One elderly black woman in a purple church hat whispered loud enough for the body cam to catch it. They always do this to us. Always. Back at the scene, while the ambulance lights painted red and blue across the glass facade of First National Bank, detectives started arriving. The first was Detective Marcus Tate, no relation to any famous names, just a tired 40-something black cop who had seen too many body cam clips like this one. He watched the playback on a tablet right there in the lobby while the crime scene techs photographed the taser prongs still embedded in Eddie's shirt. Marcus paused the footage at the exact second the probes hit. He zoomed in. Eddie's face in that frozen frame wasn't angry. It wasn't even defiant. It was exhausted. The kind of tired that lives in the bones of a man who carried sandbags in Korea at 21, who came home to redlining and, sorry, we don't hire your kind, who buried 2 brothers to street violence and 1 son to prison, who spent the last 12 years taking care of a wife whose kidneys were failing faster than their savings. Marcus sighed, rubbed his temple. What was the check for? He asked the branch manager. $7,412. The manager answered quietly. Made out to St. Louis University Hospital. Patient Marva Randolph. Marcus closed his eyes for a second. He knew that name. Everyone in the neighborhood knew Marva. She used to teach 3rd grade at Carver Elementary before the lupus, and then the kidney failure stole her classroom. Kids still talked about Ermiges, Marva's chocolate chip Fridays. He turned to Malone. You read him his rights? Malone swallowed. He reached toward his pocket when I told him to keep his hands visible. His pocket? Marcus repeated flatly. Where he kept his wallet. With his VA card. With his marriage license folded inside the same sleeve as the check. With a photo of him and Marva on their 30th anniversary, both smiling like the world hadn't already tried to break them. Malone looked at the floor. The body cam caught Marcus's next words clearly. You just taste a 64-year-old Korean War vet in the middle of a bank because a rent-a cop got nervous about handwriting. Silence swallowed the lobby. Later that afternoon, the footage leaked. Not from the police. From a 22-year-old teller named Aisha Coleman, who had quietly uploaded the cell phone clip she recorded from behind the counter to a private group chat, which then found its way to Twitter, then Facebook, then every local news station by evening. The headline wrote itself, Veteran dies after police taser deployment during routine bank visit. By nightfall, the hashtag #FefJustice for Eddie was trending in St. Louis. Marva Randolph didn't see any of it. She was in room 4017 at St. Louis University Hospital, hooked to dialysis, staring at the ceiling when her sister Loretta came in crying so hard she could barely speak. They killed him, Marva, right there in the bank. Marva didn't scream. She didn't cry out. She just closed her eyes and let one single tear roll down the side of her face into the pillow. In her lap lay the empty blue bank folder Eddie had carried that morning. The one that was supposed to hold $7,412 in a future. However short, for both of them. She whispered so softly the nurse almost missed it. He just wanted to save me. Across town, in a small 2-bedroom house on North Euclid Avenue that still smelled like Eddie's Old Spice and motor oil, the phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters, lawyers, activists, a VA representative who sounded genuinely heartbroken, neighbors bringing casseroles nobody would eat, and in the top drawer of the dresser, under a stack of folded American flags from 3 different funerals, sat Eddie's DD-214 discharge papers yellowed at the edges, stamped Honorable across the top in red ink. Nobody slept in that house that night, but the city was just waking up, because tomorrow morning the medical examiner's preliminary report would land on Detective Tate's desk, and it would contain 3 words nobody was ready to hear. Cause of death: cardiac arrhythmia induced by conducted energy weapon discharge. The question everyone would soon be asking, including the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division that had already opened a file, was painfully simple. How many warnings does a man get before the system decides his heart doesn't matter? Type Eddie in the comments if you believe this never should have happened. And tell me, have you ever watched someone you love get treated like they were already guilty? just because of the skin they were in. I'll wait for your answers before we go any deeper. The autumn wind howled through the cracked windows of that old house on North Euclid Avenue, carrying the faint scent of rain and regret. Marva Randolph sat alone in the dim living room, her dialysis port itching under the bandage, staring at a framed photo on the mantel. It was Eddie in his army uniform, 1952, fresh off the boat from Korea, his smile wide and unbreakable. Back then, he thought the war was the hardest thing he'd ever face. Bullets whizzing past his helmet in the frozen hills near the Yalu River, buddies dropping like flies in the snow. He carried a wounded sergeant 2 miles through enemy fire, earned a Bronze Star for it. Came home to St. Louis expecting a hero's welcome. Instead, he got no vacancies, signs at every factory job, redlined out of white neighborhoods, and whispers behind his back, "That boy's trouble." Eddie's mind, in those final moments at the bank, had flashed back to all of it. As Harlan Briggs eyed him suspiciously, Eddie felt that old knot in his gut, the one that tightened every time a white face assumed the worst. Not again, he thought, his internal voice a gravelly whisper honed by 64 years of holding it together. Not when Marva's counting on me. The check in his hand wasn't just paper, it was the last scrape of their savings, scraped from overtime at the auto parts warehouse where he'd worked until the layoffs hit in 2015. Age discrimination, they called it officially. Racism, Eddie knew in his bones. "You're too old for the line," the foreman said, but Eddie saw the younger white guys keeping their spots while black veterans like him got pink slips. Flashback to 2016, say. Eddie kneeling by Marva's hospital bed after her first lupus flare. The room smelled of antiseptic and despair, machines beeping like accusations. "We ain't got the insurance no more," he whispered, holding her frail hand. Marva, always the strong one, squeezed back. "We'll fight Eddie, like you did over there." But the bills piled up like enemy positions, $2,000 for meds, $5,000 for dialysis setup at home. He took odd jobs, driving for a ride, share until his back gave out, fixing neighbors' cars in the driveway for cash under the table. Every dollar went to her. "I promised you forever." He'd think at night, staring at the ceiling while she slept fitfully. "Ain't letting the system take that too." Deeper still, the triggers ran like roots through cracked soil. Eddie's father had been a sharecropper in Mississippi, lynched in 1948 for looking wrong at a white woman. Eddie was 12, hid in the barn, heard the screams. Joined the army at 18 to escape, to prove something. But Korea broke him in new ways. Frostbite in his toes that still ached on cold days, nightmares of artillery fire that woke him sweating. VA appointments were a joke, wait times months long, doctors dismissing his PTSD as old-timer blues. "Suck it up, soldier," one said. Eddie did, for decades. Raised their son Jamal, right, sent him to community college. But Jamal got caught in a drug bust in 2005. Wrong place, wrong friends. 20 years in Jefferson City Penitentiary. Systemic, Eddie called it. They lock us up and throw away the key. That morning in 2018, as he dressed in his best shirt, ironed crisp despite the frayed collar, Eddie felt the weight. Marva's surgery was scheduled for next week. Kidney transplant from a donor match they'd waited 3 years for. The check was from their joint account, withdrawn legitimately, but the bank's new fraud software flagged it because of unusual activity. Unusual meaning a big withdrawal from a poor black couple's account. Eddie kissed Marva goodbye, promised he'd be back with groceries. "Love you, soldier," she teased weakly. He chuckled, but inside, "God, don't let me fail her." At the bank, when Malone approached, Eddie's mind screamed warnings. "Hands up, don't move sudden." But the frustration boiled over. A lifetime of being profiled at traffic stops, followed in stores, denied loans. Why always us? He thought as the taser fired. In that electric surge, flashbacks, Kaleidity, Korea's cold, father's noose, son's cell, Marva's pain, his heart, scarred by hypertension the VA meds couldn't fully fix, gave out. But here's the twist nobody saw coming later. When Detective Tate dug into the bank's records, he found something buried in the fine print. The check wasn't flagged by software alone. Harlan Briggs had a history, complaints from other black customers about aggressive screening. And Malone, his personnel file held a sealed reprimand from 2016 for excessive force in a similar stop. But the real bombshell was in Eddie's wallet, overlooked in the chaos, a folded letter from the hospital confirming the funds were for life-saving treatment. Why hadn't anyone checked? As the city buzzed with protests outside the precinct, Tate leaned back in his chair, piecing it together. The motives weren't just Eddie's desperation, they were the system's quiet traps set long before he walked through those bank doors. And just when it seemed the truth might surface, an anonymous tip came in about Officer Vasquez's body cam footage, something that had been edited before it hit the news. What was hidden in those missing seconds? The bank's security camera whirred softly in the corner, its unblinking eye capturing every 10th second like a silent witness to injustice. The clock on the wall ticked to 10:47 a.m. on that fateful October morning in 2018, the air thick with the scent of fresh coffee from the break room and the metallic tang of fear. Eddie Randolph stood at the teller window, his large hands gripping the counter's edge, knuckles whitening under his dark skin. The check trembled slightly in his grasp, not from guilt, but from the raw desperation clawing at his chest. "Please, just verify it," he pleaded, his voice deep and steady, honed by years of commanding respect in the face of dismissal. The teller, a young white woman named Sarah Klein, hesitated, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. "Sir, our system flagged it. I have to follow protocol." That's when Harlan Briggs, the security guard, inserted himself fully into the frame. At 5'10" and stocky, with a paunch straining his uniform shirt and a mustache that hid his perpetual sneer, he positioned himself between Eddie and the exit. The camera angle showed both men, clearly Harlan's hand on his belt, near the pepper spray, Eddie's posture open but rigid, like a soldier at attention. "Step back from the counter, pal," Harlan ordered, his breath smelling of onions from his breakfast sandwich, close enough for Eddie to flinch. "I ain't your pal," Eddie replied evenly, but inside his thoughts raced. Marva's waiting. Don't escalate. Just breathe. The lobby hushed. A mother with a toddler clutched her child closer, the kid's whimpers echoing off the polished floors. Harlan's radio crackled to life as he keyed it. "This is Briggs at First National. Possible forgery in progress. Black male, mid-60s, tall, wearing a gray jacket. Send backup?" Eddie's eyes widened in disbelief. "Forgery? Man, I've got ID. Let me show you." He reached slowly for his back pocket, but Harlan barked, "Hands! Keep them where I can see!" The tension spiked like a live wire. Customers shifted uneasily, the rustle of coats and murmurs building a symphony of unease. Eddie's heart hammered, thud, thud, against his ribs, each beat a reminder of the high blood pressure pills he'd skipped that morning to save money. Minutes stretched into agony. Eddie paced a small circle, sweat beading on his forehead under the harsh lights, the cool autumn air from the open door, doing nothing to ease the heat rising in his veins. "This is bullshit," he muttered under his breath, flashbacks hitting him, a 1970s job interview where the boss said, "We need someone who fits the team," code for not black. A 1990s traffic stop where cops patted him down for looking suspicious. "Now this. All I want is my damn money for my wife," he said louder, turning to Harlan. "She's dying, you hear me? Kidney failure. This check is clean." Harlan smirked, crossing his arms. "Yeah, sure. Tell it to the cops." The door burst open then, admitting officers Malone and Vasquez. The body cam on Malone's chest clicked on, its lens framing the seen Eddie in the foreground, hands raised halfway in surrender, Harlan to the side looking smug, and Malone advancing like a storm. Vasquez hung back slightly, her expression wary, hand on her radio. "St. Louis PD!" "What's going on here?" Malone demanded, his voice sharp, boots squeaking on the tile. Harlan pointed. "This guy's pushing a bad check. Got aggressive when I questioned him." Eddie shook his head vehemently. "Aggressive? I just asked to speak to a manager." His voice cracked with fury, the kind that simmers from a lifetime of swallowed pride. Malone's eyes narrowed, scanning Eddie up and down, the gray hair, the slight limp from old war wounds, the desperation etched in every line. But training kicked in, or bias, or both. ID. Now, slowly. Eddie complied, pulling out his wallet with exaggerated care, the leather creaking in the quiet. "Here, VA card, driver's license. Account's in my name." But as Eddie extended the wallet, Malone misinterpreted the motion. A quick reach, he later said. "Hey, back off," Malone shouted, his pulse racing, the adrenaline flooding his system like fire. In a blur, he unholstered the taser, the yellow device glinting under the lights. Vasquez's voice cut through. "Derek." "Wait, he's complying." But Malone fired. The prongs shot out with a pop, embedding in Eddie's chest through his thin jacket. Electricity crackled, a blue arc visible on the body cam, and Eddie let out a guttural roar of pain. "Ah, God!" His body jerked violently, muscles seizing, the smell of singed fabric filling the air. He collapsed backward, head cracking against the counter's edge with a sickening thud, then sliding to the floor in a heap. Screams erupted. The toddler wailed. Sarah Klein gasped, hands over her mouth. Harlan stepped back, face ashen. Vasquez rushed forward, dropping to her knees. "Hoodie, sir, can you hear me?" But Eddie's eyes rolled back, chest heaving irregularly, the peak of agony twisting his features into a mask of betrayal. Inside, in those final conscious seconds, his thoughts fragmented. Marva, fought so hard. The body cam shook as Malone holstered the taser, his breathing ragged. He lunged. Vasquez glared up at him. No, he didn't, you idiot! The escalation was over in under 2 minutes, but the emotional wreckage lingered like smoke. Eddie's body lay still, the lobby frozen in horror, the camera capturing it all, the injustice laid bare in high definition. Let me know in the comments, have you ever witnessed a situation escalate out of nothing because of prejudice? Drop escalated if it hits close to home. But as the paramedics burst in, a hidden detail on the body cam footage would soon expose a lie that could bring the whole department down. The sirens wailed like banshees through the streets of St. Louis, cutting through the midday traffic as the ambulance sped Eddie Randolph toward Barnes Jewish Hospital. Inside the bank, chaos reigned supreme, the kind that lingers in the air like gunpowder after a shot. Officer Derek Malone paced the lobby, his boots leaving scuff marks on the marble, sweat soaking through his uniform shirt despite the cool air. His hands shook as he radioed dispatch. Subject down after CD deployment. Paramedics en route. But his voice cracked on down, betraying the facade of control. Beside him, Officer Lena Vasquez knelt where Eddie had fallen, staring at the small pool of blood from his head wound, the metallic scent mixing with the ozone burn from the taser. "This is on you, Derek." She hissed under her breath, her dark eyes flashing with anger. The body cam kept rolling, capturing her clenched fists, the way she avoided looking at Harlan Briggs, who now huddled in a corner, mumbling excuses to no one. Customers milled about in shock, some sobbing openly, others furiously typing on phones. The elderly black woman in the purple hat approached Vasquez. "You killed him!" "For what?" "Cashing a check while black." Her words hung heavy, echoing the unspoken truth that rippled through the crowd. Sarah Klein, the teller, collapsed behind her station, hyperventilating, her mind replaying the scene. Eddie's polite plea, the check's details she could have verified in seconds. "I should have called the manager sooner," she thought, guilt twisting like a knife. The branch shut down immediately, yellow tape cordoning off the area as more cops arrived, their radios crackling with urgency. Outside, a growing crowd formed. Neighbors who'd heard the sirens, activists with signs already in hand. "No justice, no peace," one shouted, the chant building as news vans pulled up, cameras flashing. At the hospital, Marva Randolph's world shattered in slow motion. Her sister Loretta burst into the room, face streaked with tears, collapsing into a chair. "Marva, Eddie, he's gone." The words landed like blows. Marva's frail body, tethered to machines that beeped indifferently, went rigid. She clutched the bedsheets, her mind flooding with memories. Eddie's strong arms around her on their wedding day in 1975, his laughter at Jamal's high school graduation, the way he'd massage her feet after long dialysis sessions. "How?" she whispered, voice breaking. Loretta explained through sobs, the bank, the suspicion, the taser. Marva's heart monitor spiked, nurses rushing in. "He was just getting the money for me." The empty bank folder lay on her lap, a cruel reminder. That night, alone in the sterile room, Marva wept silently, the pain sharper than any lupus flare. "Who'll fight for us now?" she thought, staring at the ceiling. Back home on North Euclid Avenue, the house felt like a tomb. Jamal, on emergency furlough from prison, arrived the next day, his wrists still raw from cuffs during transport. At 38, he looked older than his years. Prison tattoos peeking from his sleeves, eyes hardened by the system. He hugged his Aunt Loretta, then sat on the porch where Eddie used to smoke cigars, head in hands. "Pops always said the streets or the badges would get us," Jamal muttered, rage simmering. Neighbors stopped by with food, fried chicken, collard greens, but it went untouched. The VA sent a chaplain who droned about honorable service, but Jamal slammed the door. Where was the honor when they tased him? The ripple effects spread like cracks in ice. Protests erupted downtown, marchers blocking Grand Boulevard, signs reading "Veteran Lives Matter" and "End Police Brutality." Local businesses boarded up windows, fearing unrest like after Ferguson in 2014. Malone was placed on administrative leave, his home vandalized with graffiti of murderer. Vasquez, torn between loyalty and conscience, confided in her husband that night, "I should have stopped him." Harlan Briggs quit his job, but not before lawsuits named him. The bank issued a statement, deeply saddened, but it rang hollow as customers closed accounts in droves. Eddie's death wasn't just a statistic, it gutted lives. Marva's health plummeted without the funds, her transplant delayed indefinitely. Jamal's parole hearing loomed, but grief derailed his focus. The community mourned a hero, stolen in broad daylight. Questions burned in every mind. How does a war veteran die over a check? Why do black men face tasers first, questions later? What if Eddie had been white? Would the guard have smiled instead of radioing? And deeper, when will the system stop treating dignity like a crime? These aren't just questions, they're indictments. How many more Eddies before change? What would you do if it was your father, taste for existing? But amid the heartbreak, the investigation was just beginning, and a whistleblower from inside the department was about to drop a bombshell that would expose rot at the core. The fluorescent lights in the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department's Homicide Division buzzed like a swarm of angry flies, casting harsh shadows on the cluttered desks piled with case files and cold coffee cups. It was late November 2018, just weeks after Eddie Randolph's death, and Detective Marcus Tate sat hunched over his computer, the screen's glow illuminating the deep lines of fatigue on his face. The air smelled of stale donuts and printer ink, a far cry from the chaos of the bank lobby. Tate replayed the body cam footage for the umpteenth time, pausing at key frames. Malone's hand drawing the taser, Vasquez's shout of protest, Eddie's collapse. Something's off. Tate muttered to himself, his internal monologue a storm of doubt. He'd been on the force 20 years, seen the good and the rotten, but this hit different. Eddie was a vet like his own father, buried with full honors after Vietnam. Why rush to shock? No weapon, no threat. The investigation kicked off standard interviews, autopsies, paper trails. The medical examiner's report landed first. Cardiac arrhythmia from the taser, compounded by Eddie's untreated heart condition, noted in his VA records. Contributory factors: chronic stress, hypertension. It read. Tate dug deeper, pulling Eddie's military file: Bronze Star, honorable discharge, but post-service notes on delayed PTSD treatment due to budget cuts. Emotions welled up as Tate imagined Eddie's nights, sweats from Korea nightmares, now ended by a yellow plastic gun. He interviewed Sarah Klein. The teller was polite, scared. The check cleared when I double-checked after. Her voice trembled, guilt etching her young face. Harlan Briggs was next, squirming in the interrogation room, sweat beading on his forehead. I thought he was forged. Looked shifty. Tate pressed, shifty how? Because he was black and in a hurry. Briggs stammered, but his personnel file revealed prior complaints. 3 from minority customers about racial bias. System failed to flag him. Tate thought, anger bubbling like acid. Then came the officers. Vasquez cooperated fully, her testimony a gut punch. Malone ignored my warning. Eddie was complying. Her body cam synced with Malone's, but Tate noticed glitches. 3 seconds missing in the department's copy. Edited, he whispered, heart racing. Malone's interview was defensive. He reached aggressively. I feared for my safety. But Tate's twist came from an anonymous tip. A USB drive slipped under his office door, labeled Truth. It contained the unedited footage from Vasquez's cam. In those missing seconds, Malone muttered under his breath, caught clear as day. These types always cause trouble. These types. The racial slur hung like poison. Tate's blood boiled. Proof of bias, premeditated aggression. He confronted Vasquez privately. You knew. She nodded, tears welling. I was scared. He's got friends high up. Emotions deepened Vasquez, a single mom, risking her career for justice, echoing Eddie's own sacrifices. The revelations cascaded. Bank records showed the fraud flag was manual. Harlan overrode the system based on gut feel. A whistleblower from the bank emailed Tate anonymously. Briggs had a quota for suspicious reports. Targeted minorities to look vigilant. Tate pieced it a chain of prejudice from guard to cop, amplified by a system that protected its own. Protests swelled outside, chants of justice for Eddie, shaking the windows. Marva testified via video from her hospital bed, her voice weak but fierce. Eddie fought wars for this country, and they killed him over ink on paper. Jamal, released on compassionate grounds, spoke at rallies. My pops deserve better. We all do. The DOJ opened a civil rights probe, subpoenas flying. But the biggest twist? Malone's sealed file unsealed. 2 prior excessive force incidents, both against black men, swept under with training, slaps on the wrist. How many chances? Tate raged inwardly, slamming his fist on the desk. As evidence mounted, emotions peaked. Grief for Eddie, fury at the rot, hope for accountability. The city held its breath. Families like the Randolphs clinging to fragile faith. Yet doubts crept, would the blue wall hold? Tate stared at the USB, knowing this could break careers, including his own if backlash hit. What city are you from where stories like this hit too close? Drop it in the comments and type reveal if you want the truth to come out no matter the cost. But just as indictments loomed, a surprise witness emerged from the shadows, threatening to flip the entire case on its head. The courtroom in the Thomas F. Eagleton U.S. Courthouse in downtown St. Louis smelled of polished wood and faded hopes, the kind of place where justice was supposed to prevail but often felt like a rigged game. It was early 2021, the pandemic still raging, outside with mask and distance. But inside, the civil trial for Eddie Randolph's wrongful death pressed on, a beacon of accountability amid the gloom. The events had unfolded back in 2018, but the wheels of the system ground slow, deliberate, as if testing the Randolph family's endurance. Marva sat in the front row, her wheelchair positioned by Jamal, who gripped the armrests like they were lifelines. Her health had deteriorated. Dialysis 3 times a week, the transplant dream deferred forever without Eddie's fierce advocacy. She clutched that empty bank folder, now a talisman of loss, her eyes fixed on the judge. The evidence had piled up like indictments during the investigation's twists. Detective Tate's dogged work uncovered the edited body cam, the racial mutter from Malone, Harlan's biased history. But the surprise witness, it was Sarah Klein, the teller, stepping forward after months of soul searching. In a trembling voice on the stand, she revealed internal bank memos. Management encouraged guards to flag high risk customers, code for minorities, to prevent fraud losses. Her testimony cracked the defense wide open. Vasquez corroborated, her career hanging by a thread, but her conscience clear. I saw prejudice in action that day. Malone crumbled under cross-examination, admitting the reach was no threat, just an old man's habit. The jury, diverse, including veterans and black St. Louisians, deliberated for 3 days, the tension thick as fog on the Mississippi River. The verdict came on a rainy April afternoon in 2021's The City and the bank liable for excessive force and negligence. Compensation, or 87,000 to the Randolph estate. Not millions like in high-profile cases, but enough to cover Marva's medical debts and Jamal's halfway house after his release. Malone was fired, charged with manslaughter, but acquitted in a criminal trial. Reasonable fear, the all-white jury said. Harlan settled out of court, slinking away to obscurity. The department implemented bias training, but Tate knew it was window dressing. Policies on paper, not in hearts. The case closed officially in 2021. Justice served in fragments, leaving scars that time couldn't heal. Long-term, the effects rippled like stones in a pond. Marva passed in 2023, her funeral packed with community leaders who'd marched for Eddie. She was buried beside him in Jefferson Barracks National Cemetery, under a headstone etched with beloved wife and teacher. Jamal turned advocate, founding a nonprofit for veteran reentry programs, channeling his grief into change. Pops taught me to fight, he'd say at speaking gigs, his voice echoing Eddie's gravelly tone. Protests evolved into policy pushes, bodycam reforms in St. Louis, though enforcement lagged. The bank rebranded, but boycotts lingered, a quiet economic protest. Tate retired in 2024, disillusioned, the system protects its own. How many Eddies before we fix it? Critics called it a win, but for families like the Randolphs, it was a hollow echo. The system, built on biases baked in from redlining to policing, chewed up dignity and spat out settlements. Provocative, absolutely. When a Korean War hero dies over suspicion, it's not accident, it's design. A system that values property over people, badges over black lives. Safe to say, we've got to demand more, or it'll keep happening. Empathy for the vets who served, anger at the betrayal, catharsis in the small victories. But the fight ain't over. At Eddie's graveside on anniversaries, Jamal would stand silent, wind whispering through the flags. One question haunted him: what if Eddie had walked in white? Would the check clear without question? The final hook lingers, in a nation of thank you for your service. Why do we let the system kill its heroes? What would you do if the system failed someone you loved like this? Type "system failed" in the comments and share your thoughts. And if stories like this move you, real tales of struggle and strength, hit that subscribe button. More Midnight Dispatches coming your way. Don't miss out.